Welcome to How We Get Thru, the podcast where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm Jen, your host, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Thru app. Today's guest is Jess Beachkofsky, a board-certified psychiatrist licensed in Florida and Texas. In this episode, Jess shares the truth about how not all psychiatrists are pill pushers. If you've ever thought about seeing a psychiatrist or have self-diagnosed yourself through an online quiz, you'll want to listen in as Jess sets the record straight on how to get an actual diagnosis. So take a listen. Hi, and welcome back. Today's guest is Jess Beachkofsky. She's a board-certified psychiatrist licensed in Florida and Texas, and she helps people get through specific mental health diagnoses with medication and therapy. Jess is an outdoor enthusiast, and most weekends you can find her camping with her family. Hi, Jess. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is so exciting. You're like our house psychiatrist at How We Get Thru. So we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, certainly. I love being here. This is great.
Yeah. So we like to start off every series with every new guest that comes on with a mental health myth. And we'd love to know yours. I'm sure you have a ton.
Sure. Yeah, I do have a couple. So the first two that come to mind, people think psychiatrists are just pill pushers. We're just going to throw meds at whatever. And that our favorite thing to do is to label people. That you're going to come and see me, I'm going to give you a bunch of labels, and I'm going to throw a bunch of meds at it and send you on your way.
Yes.
That's not how I do it. So
yes. No, I think that's so true. I think even as a therapist, there's certain myths of like psychiatrists and even just bridging the gap between how we can really work together. And I'm curious of why you think this is a mental health myth, or why do you think it's so widely spread?
Well, this part is a bit unfortunate, but I think as everyone is probably aware of in the medical community, whenever you go see a doctor, your appointments seem to get shorter and shorter, and you wait longer and longer, and there's more papers to fill out, more things to do. And I think that's just the nature of a system that's getting bogged down by just too much administrivia. I think a lot of doctors they're really time crunched and they're pressured, and there's a lot of pressure on the performance and getting those numbers in, which means seeing as many patients as possible for as quickly as they possibly can. And I think in some cases you may have seen a doctor who really just kind of rushed through and was like, all right, this is what I think is going on here. Try this and we'll see how you do. And we'll see you in 3 months. But I think psychiatry has the opportunity to not do it quite that way. You can find somebody who's willing to take the time, figure out what's going on, and walk you through all the steps of what you're doing and why it matters.
I love that. That's so true. And what kind of brought you to the field of psychiatry? So have you had that experience too of like feeling rushed in the room and wanting to do it differently? Because I think you have a very unique perspective. And I think it's time to like kind of rewrite the narrative around psychiatry.
For sure. I am in an excellent position as well. So I feel like I can take the steps that I need to provide excellent care for my patients at a schedule that works for me. But I never expected to go into medicine, and certainly not psychiatry. I had been a college student for a very long time, and I was actually an art education major. And September 11th happened. And for some people, that was a harder push to get their message out there. But for me, I was like, I don't think I have a message. So what could I do instead? And that actually led me to medical school. And I joined the military and I went to medical school. And medical school was in Bethesda, Maryland. I am from Florida, and that's where I live now, which is great. But I had never experienced winter before, and I fell apart. My second year, like, it was cold and dark, and I know for some people Maryland is not that cold or dark, but
I'm a California girl. I'm like, that sounds terrible.
It was all, I didn't know how to use an ice scraper. Like, I was just trying to like drive in that little space where the window was, like, I didn't know. Anyway, I went to see the campus doctor and started therapy, started an antidepressant. I was diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder. It felt terrible, but the treatment was profound. I got profoundly better. It was excellent. I recovered, and I right now I don't need anything because I am back in Florida again, so we don't have any winter here, so I'm doing just fine. But I went through a cycle through medical school, those 4 years where I spent in a place with winter. And every winter I would expect to do a little more therapy. I had a light. I used to eat my breakfast by one of those super bright lights.
Yes.
They really do help. And I took my medication, and it was a really positive experience for something that I didn't know anything about, was super scared of. So I kind of feel it when my patients come and they're like, I don't really want to do this thing. I'm afraid of it, and I don't know if it's going to help. So I know what it feels like to sit on that side, the death.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is so powerful when you are doing this work. And I think that's, how we all get into the field is like, oh, I've experienced this one thing and either found healing through it or still working through it. And I want to help other people. And so that is what all my clients say is like, I don't know if I want to get on medication. I don't know if I want to get on medication. And so for you to have that experience and to help walk people through, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think it brings a certain perspective that I can be patient with patients. Like when they're not ready, it's okay. We don't have to be ready. We don't have to make that decision today. And I was lucky in the military. That was where I started my medical career. So I was in the military. I ran a big inpatient unit, and I spent time with a lot of people. We weren't bound by the same constraints. We don't run insurance. Like it's just we take care of our military members. So I had the luxury of just taking care of patients in the way they needed care. And I got to help a lot of military members and their families just be well, or as well as they were able to be. And then I just kind of moved through the system, and now I do virtual appointments. And like I said before, like I don't play the numbers game. It really hurts me if I have to rush a lot and see patients for just a short period of time. I get very overwhelmed, and it's draining. I don't feel like I'm giving good care, and I think my patients probably can tell. So I like to take longer appointments, be a little more thoughtful. But not everybody does that. So you have to look for somebody who, like, that's how they want to run their practice. So
yeah. I mean, it sounds like an energy thing, like a personal energy thing, but then it also just sounds like a really good way of practicing, like of taking care of people.
Sure. And it takes time. So one of the things that's so important is building something called the therapeutic alliance. So that's whatever the relationship is between, well, any provider, any medical provider or therapist. There's so much literature out there that shows that single relationship can have a bigger impact on how well somebody gets than anything else. So if you are rushing through appointments, and for some people, that's just how it has to be, but it doesn't allow, I think, that same amount of time to build the trust. It can still happen for sure. There are great providers that have to work fast. But that piece is really important. You have to be able to trust each other and make decisions that align and make sense, or else you're not really going to get the benefit that you're looking for. It's not going to work.
Yeah. And I think what you're speaking to is also what we were talking about before when clients are so hesitant to even get on medication. Like they need trust. They need you to really know them and understand them, that you know what's right for them, or you're going to educate them on their different routes to do the same thing, right? And so, yeah, that is like hugely important. I think in therapy, obviously, it's like the number one thing that we talk about.
I hope so.
yeah. But it is important, like a right fit therapeutically for a therapist and a right fit for a psychiatrist is equally important.
Right. And I agree. So that's the other thing. So with the labels piece, it's really important. It is really important for me to diagnose the people that I see. So that's a really important thing you're going to get from a psychiatrist. They are going to diagnose. Part of it is insurance. That's how we bill for things. But the diagnosis is what helps us communicate to other providers what we think is going on, because we filtered through all the information that you've given, and we can kind of put it in sort of a bucket. It's not perfect, but it does help us figure out what we're doing. There are certain medications that make sense for certain buckets. So if I see a patient and it says this is their diagnosis, but they're on these medications and it doesn't make any sense, then I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what's really going on with this person. So for me, it's really important to spend that extra time, ask the questions, dig into the stuff like, when did this start? What exactly is going on? How bad is it? These kinds of things, to put these pieces together. And then I tell the patient that I'm working with what I think is going on. I say, I think you meet this diagnosis and this is why. And then I wait for feedback. Does that align with you? Do you think that I'm on the right track? Because sometimes patients are like, no, you get it. You're getting it wrong. That's not what I think the problem is. And I need to know that, because if I'm going down the wrong path, I'm going to choose medications that may not be effective. They're not all effective for everything. So that's really an important piece. So I am going to label you, but I don't just spend 3 seconds being like, oh, you check these boxes, so clearly you're this, and we're going to throw this medication at it and you'll be on your way. So it's really important for me to make sure I'm understanding what you're trying to tell me in a way that's valuable for both of us, because the treatment decisions, it's a big deal. If you're choosing to put chemicals in your body or you're choosing not to, like, we need to know why we're making these decisions and that we're doing it thoughtfully.
Yes. Wow. I love that. And I think even just talking about like the nuance of label of how relieving that can feel and how scary that can feel. And that's why people come to you, right? Like I don't diagnose in my practice. But in your field, it's like imperative, and that's why people are coming. And so have you had like mixed reviews? Like what is it like on the other side in your own experience and with your clients to like get that diagnosis?
So this is pretty broad, but in general, no matter who I'm talking to, there is some sense of relief. Sometimes they feel relieved that I'm telling them that they don't have the problem that they were worried about, or sometimes they're relieved that they meet criteria for an actual thing. Like they can tell their mom, like, no, mom, like I went and saw a doctor and the doctor gave me a diagnosis. And for some patients, that's super validating. And that's important. However you're going to feel about it is valid. You are allowed to feel however you want about the diagnosis that you get, but know you're going to get one. It's going to happen if you're seeing a psychiatrist, because I would imagine if you're going to see someone, you have some level of distress that's instigating this whole thing. So you probably meet criteria for something. And sometimes that'll be something, if I have someone that's very anxious and really is clearly sending those signals, like, I really don't want to be here, I might ask, what are you afraid of? Like, what is it? Are you afraid that you do have OCD and that I'm going to name it and we're going to have to face that? Or are you worried that you don't have OCD and then we're going to have to deal with something else? So it's really kind of, it's a lot of interesting interplay between if people are searching for a diagnosis or something to feel like, oh, I align with that and I can identify with that. And now I know where I'm going or what to expect. And then people that are just like, I'm not really ready for this right now. I'm glad that that's what you think is going on, but I'm going to step back from that and decide how I feel about it first.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that like nuance of every human's experience is going to be so different. And when you're in the industry of humans, you have to respond differently. You have to hold things differently. You have to give room for a lot of different reactions around that. I'm curious of like your referrals. Do people usually come in like, hey, my therapist said I might have this, or my doctor, or people like just coming straight off, not from doctor or therapist and saying, I have ADHD?
I would say right now, my private practice, almost always, it's a therapist referral through the patient. So the patient will come to me and they'll be like, I've been seeing a therapist and my therapist thinks that I should see someone about medication. And I think certain people work in a certain way and they look for certain providers. So it's probably a skewed view of things, but really therapists have such a big impact on what their clients may choose to do. And if you are a therapist and you're working with somebody and you think that maybe they could get some benefit, or maybe you're just like, I'm doing all the things, they're doing all the things, and it's not clicking, it's not getting better. That may be a good indicator for them to see someone. And it could be there's a psychiatric diagnosis that requires medication, or it could be there's a medical diagnosis too. And so one thing by referring people to psychiatry is that we're trained medically, we're medical doctors, so we're trained to look at all these other things that might not be simply mental health. So perhaps we order labs and we look at your thyroid function. Your thyroid can mimic a lot of psychiatric disorders, but all the Prozac in the world won't treat your thyroid. That's not what it does. So there's a lot of different things that we can look at. But yeah, most of my patients come from their therapist's behest. Like, you're doing the work, but we're not getting the results. So let's see if there's something else going on. It's super helpful.
Is okay, percentage wise, just want to know, is the therapist correct or not? Like, how many therapists are like, well, I mean, you're getting the patient's, point of view of that, but.
So this is an interesting question. So I do have a lot of therapists that don't diagnose, like you were saying, and that's fine. And so a lot of times I'll work with the patient and what they've been discussing with their therapist. Like, what is your therapist concerned about? Why are you here? Because a lot of times the patient doesn't want to tell me what the main problem is. But I would say it's generally spot on. Whatever the therapist and the client have been working on together, when they make their way to me, it's generally something that's appropriate for medication. And most of the patients at that point are ready to make a decision, either that first appointment or the second appointment. So, like I said before, if you're not ready, some people want to do research on what I want to do. And so I give them all the stuff and tell them the things and send them out and say, bring me your questions so we can make a decision next time. But some people are just like, I've been suffering. I'm ready to do this. We talked about it and now it's time. So the therapists are generally spot on with what's happening and when. I mean, maybe not always when to refer, but I never send someone back without being like, oh, you don't need me. That has never happened.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's a good point, or maybe even a reassurance. I think on this side of when we're talking about medication, it's almost like we're priming the client, like maybe over a couple sessions, and how to advocate or what questions to ask. But also, I mean, I feel like in school, like for therapists, we weren't really taught of like how to really collaborate with psychiatry. I mean, you learn about the drugs, but it's like such a one class, like I just think there could be so much more integration between the two, and like how we can build relationships around that, because it is holistic care, right? It is like another part of the puzzle that I think we're all trying to get better at.
This is something, this is near and dear to my heart. I love this. I love working with therapists, and I know not everybody has time. There are plenty of psychiatrists out there that don't have time to talk to therapists in depth, and that's okay. But personally, I find great joy. We share these people, and we're both, or all of us are working together to try to get them to this optimal mental wellness. And it really works so much better when we're all on the same page and we're sending the same messages. And that's why when people are in therapy and they're working with the therapist and their therapist is like talking through some of these things, it's really important. But so first of all, the therapist may think something is going on. They can see from the outside looking in what's happening, because sometimes you don't have the insight to see for yourself what's really happening. And therapists really, they get this, they do this. This is what happens. But then you're also priming, like you said, like you spend a few therapy sessions talking about, what would it be like to have medication? What are the really concerning things? What would this feel like if you sat with a psychiatrist, and all these things? And then that makes my job really easy. Like how I was saying, so many people are ready. When they come to see me, they're ready. Not that you told them what medication they should be on, or like none of that, but just that they're open to the idea that we can make changes. Yes. And that we'll work together, that it's, even if I don't call and talk to you for 2 hours about this client that you have, that we share, the idea that you see something and you let me know and we're working towards the same goals, that patient can feel really cared for, that they're getting everything they need from all the different directions so that they can continue to build up in the direction that they want to go.
Yes, which I think is a beautiful segue to your course in the app, because, I mean, Jess was our first recording. She was our first script. I mean, I'm way more organized now, Jess. You should see it now, but like, it was just like going back and forth, like, yeah, I think this is good. I think this is good. Sending our first film kit. Like, we'll always have a special place in our hearts.
Yeah, it was super fun. It was so fun.
Yeah. I'm just saying yes. And even in that, I remember talking to you about what a course would look like. And we landed on the 5 most popular diagnoses, because there's a lot of like TikTok self-diagnosis. There's a lot of like misinformation out there. And what I think we're wanting to kind of replicate in these videos is, if you're not in therapy and have a place to kind of talk through your symptoms or your hesitations or what it's going to be like on the other side is like, here's this wealth of education and support around psychiatry, what it is, what it isn't, and most importantly, what the diagnoses are and what they're not. And so we kind of landed on like, so you think you have ADHD, so you think you're OCD. I think there's panic attacks, PTSD. What was the other one?
Neurodivergent.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's like my passion project of like, people are just shouting out these diagnoses all over the place. But what is your perspective of that, being the like diagnoser?
Sure. And just to clarify, so they're popular diagnoses, just like you said, like this is stuff that is being talked about all over the place, not the most common diagnoses. So of course, like depression, anxiety, that's going to be the most common. And I don't talk about that. But we're talking about the things that people are throwing these words around and just saying all this stuff. And we want to make sure we get a real clear sense. So earlier was talking about the nuances of like diagnosing. There's a lot of vocabulary that goes with these things, and it means something really specific to psychiatrists and other people who diagnose. Like it's very specific. So when pop culture gets a hold of it and like people just start tossing around these ideas and they're like, oh, I'm going to flex this and make this work for me in this situation. That's fine. Like use the verbiage however you want, but it's very confusing when somebody comes to me and they're like, yeah, everybody says I'm so OCD. Like who is everybody? All your therapists are saying you're OCD, because it means something really, really specific when someone has OCD. So, this has been really fun for me because I think you challenged me. You were like, I need some examples. Like, show me what it is and what it isn't. And I was like, but I see this. I mean, obviously, I see a lot of people all the time. And I do see a lot of, people that are like, yeah, it's this. I have this. And it's like, well, you have some bits and pieces of that. But we need to think of like mental health, mental disorders, mental wellness. All of this is on a spectrum, right? So like you travel the spectrum. So you can be very high functioning and have some things that just come up. Anxiety is normal. Like regular people that have no diagnosis get anxious. That's normal. It's a human experience. There are some people that their anxiety is so bad that they can't function. They don't go out of the house. They don't interact with other people. They can't do anything. And so that would be the other end of the spectrum. So we're looking in between there. So I think one of the biggest takeaways from when you're going through these things, one of the most important things is to look at how dysfunctional is this for you? Like, is this impacting your life in a way that you can't meet, not your goals, but just your baseline? So this is an important thing. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, you're below what you think is your baseline. So there you have this baseline of functioning, like I'm doing okay, like that's where I'm at. If you're below that, you may need medication to help with that. If you're just trying to be a badass and hit the top all the time, like medication is not necessarily going to optimize all that. It's not designed to make you be like a superwoman or superhuman. Like it's not designed for that, but it is designed to help lift people up. So like antidepressants don't make you feel happy. They make you feel less depressed. So you're coming up from the bottom. So one of the things I just wanted to help, like, are you or are you not? Well, you may have a bunch of traits or have some symptoms of some things. But if you don't meet the time criteria, like how invasive it is in your life, or you don't meet the severity, then it might just be, it's quirky. It's just part of who you are. We all have personalities too. Like, so that's a piece of it.
Yes. And I think what is difficult is like, like a BuzzFeed quiz or something about ADHD or OCD. You can like say yes to most of those questions. You know what I mean? Because some of them are just like a human experience, And so I think that's what you're saying is like, and that's what I think with with the app in general is like getting the right education, getting the experts to give us the right education around these everyday things that we start to really like become harmful in self-diagnosing ourselves or other people, right? And I think that harmful part is like, I mean, it's great that psychology is way more mainstream, right? But we're kind of like throwing it so carelessly, and that can be really harmful and incorrect and send you down a path that you're not supposed to go on.
Yeah. Nobody should be putting chemicals into their body that don't belong there. So if you're really trying to get a diagnosis, you're going to get recommended to take a medication, and it might not be what you need. And that's just not going to be beneficial. And some of this is expectation management too. I see a lot of graduate students, and they are struggling. Man, graduate school is hard. And they'll say like, I don't know, do you think I have ADHD? And it's like, well, let's go down this road and let's look at it. And we talk through the things like, did you have problems when you were 7? Like, what kind of problems? Do you have only problems with school, or is it in all aspects of your life? So those are the kinds of things that sometimes it's hard to pick up on that if you're just looking online. And you can do great research. You can find all kinds of stuff, but you can find all kinds of stuff that isn't necessarily helpful. And you can go into your psychiatrist's office and be like, I think I meet this criteria and I think I need these medications. But a good psychiatrist is still going to ask you all the questions and tell you what they think. So
yes. But I love that you also just kind of shed some light on, like you said, like seasonal things that we go through, or really, trauma or traumatic, or like a pandemic or something that we're still trying to like trudge ourselves out of, that isn't necessarily like this lifelong experience, but that there can be like time periods of your life that are more difficult than others, that might need a certain diagnoses, but it might not be this lifetime diagnoses.
That's 100% true. And that's a big conversation I have with a lot of my patients, sometimes from the very beginning, is like, I don't want to start this medication. Does this mean I'm going to have to be on it for the rest of my life? And so that's one of the big things too. There are few diagnoses that I would recommend long-term medications for. And most of them, we just want to find that balance where you're doing a lot better. You're closer to your baseline. You can learn the skills that can help you function even better. And then once you're stable at that point for a long time, if you want to talk about coming off the medication, say 6 months, like we can slowly peel off bits and pieces and see how you do. Your brain is super flexible and it's super plastic. And the idea is that it will be able to catch back up again. We give it this boost, like, here's some medication, we're going to help you get things. You turn this thing up and you turn this thing down and you try to find that sweet spot again. And then when you very slowly pull it away, we hope that your brain will just maintain the levels that help you feel normal for you.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I love that. And this might be a difficult question, but in like the lifetime diagnoses, like I feel like ADHD or OCD, is that more like personality, genetic makeup, where PTSD or trauma is something that happens to you, right? Even panic attack, I don't know, there might be some genetic thing there too, but that's like moments.
It is a difficult question, but I like this one because I have answers. I don't have all the answers, but I do have answers based on what the research is that we have in our field right now. Obviously, this is changing all the time. What we had 100 years ago is not the same as what we have now. But you're right. So just the nature of like a neurodivergent or an ADHD diagnosis, we're talking about something that started with your brain when your brain started. So this is something that happened when your brain was formed. So before you were even born. This is a brain thing. There's something different about your brain than the average brain that we expect to see. And that generally has to do with genetics, but it can also do with the environment, or like, what mom is doing, if mom is super stressed or whatever. But we don't know. So anybody who's like, don't have red number 5, like we're not really sure. Like, you don't have to be that specific. But yeah, so there's the nature versus nurture. And there's a huge genetic component for so much of this stuff. And you pegged it. Like the neurodivergent stuff, ADHD, huge genetic component that runs in families. OCD as well. OCD is looking more and more like a midbrain issue. It's a problem with the reward center. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And then things like panic disorder, we're not seeing as much genetically for that. PTSD is definitely much more of the environment-based stuff. And with that one, we're seeing that if you start from a bad place where you have a lot of trauma starting out younger, it just sets you up to experience PTSD later in life. But we don't know where that trauma line is for people. Like different people have the line in different places where you cross it. There are plenty of military members out there that I would see, they go on 8 deployments and everything is terrible, but the 9th one is the one that they can't recover from. And so suddenly they have PTSD. But I went 8 times and I came back and I was fine. Why this time? We don't know, but you've crossed that line in your brain. So there's a lot of different things that come to play together. And that's why treating it is so tricky, because there's a lot of things that we're up against. I'm not going to change your genetics, and I'm not going to change the structure of your brain. So a lot of what we do medication-wise is theory-based. So that's why I think it doesn't work for everyone, because we have certain information on certain kinds of brains and people, and we don't know every single person's specific genetic makeup. So there are a lot of nuanced things there too that I don't know why you don't respond to medication. But we're not going to blame you. We're going to blame something in your genetic code. There's something about your ability to metabolize stuff, and we'll find something else that works.
Yeah. Again, I think you're speaking to the beautiful and complicated part that we are all so unique, even in the cells of our bodies, the way our brain functions, our personalities, our spirits, our soul, like everybody is so unique. And when you're treating people, right, it is that let's look at the entire scope of your life to see if we can kind of make sense together. And there's some things that we might not be able to make sense of, but we can get through it together, and still that might be like it's not maybe the best answer for everyone all the time. But again, it's like, I'm not going to give you something that you're not, or keep you on a medication that's not working. Like it still is good treatment.
Gray. It's very gray. And we have to, hopefully the people that are drawn to working in the mental health field are able to tolerate the gray that it is, because there's a lot of unknown and there's a lot of shifting around. And I have to tell my patients sometimes, we don't know. I don't know. Like, we can try these things, like the theories say this, but I don't know. And it can be really difficult to say, here, put these chemicals in your body. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. I have tons of data on what's supposed to happen or worst case scenario, but I don't know your body. I don't know exactly how your brain is going to respond to this thing. And the other piece of that, you were talking about, unique individuals. And it's true. If you're really struggling with something and you're comparing yourself to someone else who's not struggling with the same thing, that doesn't mean that you're not struggling, that's not valid. Someone can't tell you that your trauma is not traumatic enough. Like if you're meeting the criteria because you're so, you're impacted by these symptoms so much, it doesn't matter to me what your trauma is. I'm not there to judge that. I'm there to manage your symptoms for you so that you can function better. So same thing with any of the things. If it's something that is causing problems for you so that you can't function well, it warrants a visit from whether or not it really meets the criteria.
Yes. Jess, it's such good information. I think for even me being in the mental health field, but I'm not an MD, I'm not a psychiatrist. And so even like I learned so much in the course, but just talking to you again, and I think this is really good for the average person just talking or listening to the podcast, but even for therapists, that we need to be more educated in psychiatry, in how the brain works, in the uniqueness of everybody. And so I just really appreciate you coming on here and telling us what's up.
Thanks so much. I love sharing this kind of stuff.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this part up. And if you're listening, stay tuned for part 2. And Jess is going to walk us through what it's actually like in your first appointment. And she's going to give us tips. She's going to give us tricks so that you can feel really confident in getting your diagnosis. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening to our show. We hope that we've given you a clear picture around how a psychiatrist can help you gain greater understanding of what you are experiencing. If you're curious if you actually meet criteria for ADHD, OCD, panic attacks, PTSD, or neurodivergent, check out Jess's course, The 5 Most Popular Diagnoses on the How We Get Thru app, which is available for both Android and iPhone. Stay tuned for next week's episode as Jess gives insight to how diagnoses are formed and how to best prepare for your first psychiatry appointment. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.